Hi, I'm Janet Gross. Welcome to Coping Today, a place where we talk about mental health and well-being. Most people hope for a life well lived. Eventually, they want to look back and say they've accomplished, made a difference, lived honorably. But of course, to end well, it's probably a good idea to think of those things before the end. Dr. Roy Salgado, professor of counseling at the University of Holy Cross, joins us on this journey, helping us figure things out and talking things out.
Yes, it's important for us to keep this in mind. Oftentimes we live in the moment, we live in today, and we don't necessarily think about what things are going to look like in the future.
Yeah.
What is it going to look like when we're older, when we're at that end of life stage, reflecting upon our life, on a life well lived or not. And we all go through it. We all at some point will face that point where we're reflecting back. How was my life? Was it a life well lived? Do I have regrets? Do I approve of the things that I did? And sadly enough, there are some people that reach the end of life and they're in a state of despair. And they realize that there's so many things that they perhaps would have done differently. They just happen not to have. And now here they are, not able to. And so one of the things that it's important for each of us to really think about is to create the conditions where we don't find ourselves in that phase of life where we're in a state of despair, when perhaps it's just unbearable and challenging and we've burnt bridges and we're in pain and we're suffering and we're in distress. We want to live a life of integrity. We want to be at the end of our life, wherever that is, and say, you know what? I lived a life, and it was a good one. It was the one that I had, and I had good relationships with my family, with my friends, with my community, and I served, I did well, and just feeling good. No one wants to reach that stage and have regrets.
Right, because you also don't want to get at the end, even although many people see it as a goal, you don't want to get to the end and say, wow, I got as much money as I possibly could, and I have power, and that is when you're reflecting, that's, you lose the arrogance, I think, a lot at the very end.
When you're reflecting on your life, people don't think about their houses or their money or their things or dirty dishes or the garbage not having been taken out. In our lives, we get into these little fights, if you will. You didn't take out the trash, or you didn't do this, you didn't do that. The dishes have been piling up, and we get irritated with these daily tasks that at the end of the day, we don't care about. Similarly, these big things of the grand homes or the career or the money, these things, fame, power, we don't think about these things at the end of life. What are the things that we reflect upon? We reflect upon the time spent with our loved ones, with our spouses, with our children, with our friends, with our family. That's the true richness of a life well lived, and to be able to create the conditions throughout life so that at the end of life you can revel in that.
So when you're preparing that, I guess it starts at the beginning.
At the beginning.
Which is so smart to think of living an honorable life as you're living it.
Yes.
Because that's when you make bad choices or the good choices. And it all starts with, how you're raised and what you let in your head and in your heart, and then what comes out.
I think of this gentleman that I counseled many years ago, and I feel that I can speak to this because this is about 20 years ago. So this person was in his 90s 20 years ago, so at this point he has passed, I'm sure. But he was in an assisted living facility, and he didn't have any visitors. No one came to visit him. And so as I'm counseling him, I asked, what was that like, and what perhaps may have contributed to this? Is there anyone that he could call? And he said he had many children. He said, I had many, many children with many, many different women, and I didn't take care of any of them. And so he says, I was just about me. He says he indulged in his own vices and wanting to, have fun and party and have a good time and go out. And he really didn't invest time, energy, and effort in the children. He didn't invest time, energy, and effort in the relationship with any one of the women with whom he had children. And it appears that he didn't with his siblings or others, that he burnt a lot of bridges. And so at the end of his life, in his 90s, no one cared to come and see him. And it was a very sad state, and he had all these regrets, and so wherever he might be at this point, I'm sure that, not I'm sure, but I would like to think that he was able to resolve it, on some level. But do we want to get there? Do we want to, live a life just for ourselves and then be at the end of life and be in despair? Because this gentleman truly was in despair, as many people, well, not about many, but some people often can be at this late stage in life. We want to mitigate that and prevent that. We want to make choices where we put others first, where we serve, where we give to our community. So at the end of life, we feel that we've lived a life of integrity and not be in despair.
I know my pastor would say occasionally, play the movie. Like if you're thinking of doing something, play the movie and see how it might end.
Right.
And it might not end well. So you want to make sure you consider all things before you do something you're thinking about.
That's a great exercise, actually. One of the exercises that we do with our students, too, when we're discussing these end-of-life type of situations is an activity where we have a student write their own obituary. It seems a little morbid, but from their perspective of wherever they are, whether they're 20 years old or 40 years old or 60 years old, because we have students of all ages in our master's and doctoral programs, to write their obituary. And it gives them some insight in terms of how they see themselves now. Like, oh, you know what, this is how I see myself. Maybe I ought to do something a little differently, because right now, the things that seem to be playing more of an important role don't lead to the conditions that contribute to integrity at the end of life as opposed to despair. So it's probably a good exercise to play that movie, to write that obituary. You don't have to share it with the world, but just to be introspective.
Yes.
And see if there's anything that one might need to adjust so that they can get to the end of life and feel that they have lived a life of integrity and not get to a point of despair.
I love that idea because you can change it. You haven't lived that one yet, so you could, adjust and say, this is what I would like to have someone say about me.
Yes, yes.
And maybe say about me today.
Right.
You don't have to wait.
One of the things that I see all the time, unfortunately, whether they're people on the lower socioeconomic status of society or on the upper end of society, is work. Work. I work with families where they're not spending enough time with one another because they have these positions where it just requires so much of them, these upper middle class individuals with these highly stressful jobs, or people who are trying to make ends meet and they have 3 jobs, one during the day, one at night, one on the weekend. At the end of the day, it limits the time that they spend with their loved ones. And so at the end of the day, do we want to have an obituary or a life where, you know what? He worked every waking minute that he possibly could, every single moment of his life. I don't know if that's what we want our life to have represented. Work is important.
Work hard, but not always.
Work hard and work is important. It's essential. There are other things that are as important, if not more so, that we ought to take into consideration at different points in our lives in order to be able to have a rich, meaningful, well-lived life.
And balanced, too.
And balanced.
You got to work, you have to earn, you have to protect, you have to keep your family, all those things.
Yes.
But, balance.
The work-life balance is crucial. We need to work, and we need to experience our life and nurture it with our loved ones.
Okay. Well, we're going to talk more about this in just a second. When we come back, we'll talk about the other side of things and what that looks like. Stay with us.
Thanks for buying a fishing license. I want you to picture all of the great things this simple purchase does. Like building public boat ramps, keeping local waters clean, and maintaining a healthy fish population. When you buy a fishing license, you do a lot. Every dollar protects and maintains your local waterways for future generations to enjoy. Learn more at takemefishing.org/Louisiana.
Welcome back. We're talking about a well-lived life and reflecting on decisions and choices. Most people want to smile as they look back, but obviously the hows and whys of the past will determine the emotions that go with that reflection. And we've been talking about, when you look back and, you need to mitigate things. The earlier you do that, the earlier you face those things, you can relieve yourself of challenges that you might face along the way.
Absolutely, because when you think about, when you think about what we've been discussing, integrity versus despair, something that we all at one point will experience at the future in late life, elderhood.
Or in an event where you're You think it might be the end.
Yes, or in an event where you're faced with your mortality.
Yes.
Because oftentimes, not oftentimes, when we come to this point of integrity versus despair, is because we're facing our mortality, whether that is because of advanced age and we realize that we are limited and mortal, or we experience, a diagnosis or something, then we speed up to that, integrity versus
right,
despair.
yeah.
How have I lived my life? And so, putting that aside, when you think about where you are, whether you're a 20-year-old and you're in your 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, whatever age a person may find themselves in, to think, where am I now? Where am I now? And do I need to do anything to get to a point where I can mitigate experiencing this level of despair? Do we have the means to be able to address this at an earlier stage? So you might have a person who's in their 20s and engaging in behaviors that are not working for them, as oftentimes human beings tend to do in their 20s. 20-somethings tend to be very well known and famous for making poor choices. It is what it is, it's developmental. But that can set the stage for later stages in life, for middle adulthood and late adulthood. And so to really reflect at earlier stages, is what I'm doing working for me? Is what I'm doing working for others? Am I contributing to that which would be called a life well lived? Or am I going down a path that could lead to despair?
Also, just when you were talking, it's not so much of, what should I do to improve my life? Maybe what I can do to improve others.
Right.
So when you're thinking of other people rather than yourself, that's when you're looking back on that, you're gonna
Yes.
think, okay.
And in those earlier stages, adolescents and 20-somethings, young adults, oftentimes it's about developing the self. Who am I? What am I? What am I to do in this world? And so that's a big part of
my part.
What's my part in the grander scheme of things. That's very natural and very typical, and more power to each of us who have gone through that and those that are going through it and all of that, and that's fine. That then leads to the next stage of development when you're in middle adulthood and you are in what's referred to as stagnation versus generativity. Do you stagnate?
Okay. Dr. Roy is.
So do I just go living my life and wake up, go about the day's events and go to bed? Wake up, go about the day's events, look up and 30 years have passed and it's been a much ado about nothing. Or
Stagnation, that's where you're getting.
that's the stagnation.
Okay.
Okay. I'm here, but
not doing anything.
not doing anything. Or generativity. Am I giving back in some way? Am I giving back to my family? Am I giving back to my community? Am I giving back in the service that I do for others? Has my time on this earth been impactful and meaningful in small ways and big ways to others? And when we don't feel that we have, when we feel that we're stagnant and we're just kind of waking up and same old rigmarole and there's really
It's
not
the
much going on,
grind.
it's just a grind, that has the potential to lead us to a point of despair later on in life. We need to feel that we're giving back in some way to someone else, whether that's to a spouse, to a child, to others in general. And the person that can answer that question, yes, in my day-to-day, it's not just a grind where I'm getting up and existing. I'm doing for others in whatever capacity that is, whether it's small or big, then that person can say, or tends to be able to say at the end of life, I had a life full of integrity, and I was able to do this, and I did it for decades, and it was great.
So are you saying there's something in us that wants to be giving?
Yes.
Isn't that great that God puts that in us?
Yes, it's wonderful. We want to. We want to have that meaning.
So we can nurture that.
Yes. We are here for a purpose. We are here to be in community with others and serve others. We're not here to take and take and take and have it be about me, 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 I. Those who spend however many decades of life doing that, they find themselves at the end of it being in despair. Those who give throughout their life, and the earlier they start to do that, it pays back in dividends. It's compounded, and at the end of life, you step back and you feel good.
And there's no point in life where you can't start that.
At any point. The only time that you can't do it is once you're gone.
That's right. But you
can do it up until the point that you're no longer here and make new choices for yourself and make new decisions that impact others in good ways.
That's a remarkable thing too, that you always have the opportunity.
Yes.
And in any amount.
In any amount. And in counseling, you can become aware of that. You know, individuals who struggle with these types of issues, whether they are in young adulthood, middle adulthood, or later on in life, that they can come here and say, these are things that are not working for me, and reflect upon it and gain perhaps insight. You know, a counselor has the skill set to be able to hold up a mirror to a person and say, this is what is going on here, and you're able to see it in a new way that perhaps you weren't able to see it because, you know, you're in the thick of it. And so to be able to catch that and make the requisite changes if need be can be helpful.
So that self-awareness thing is a tool,
right?
You know, or maybe a big step, not
right.
a tool.
And there's a lot of people that lack a certain degree of awareness, that they go about their lives and not realizing how their behavior and their way of being adversely impacts others. And so to kind of you know, become aware of it.
Right. Not only impacts others, it impacts you.
Yes.
Because anything that you're doing to somebody else will,
yes.
you know, that whole Dorian Gray thing, it's going to build up, you know, until, you know,
yes.
you eventually have to face that portrait.
You do. You eventually have to face it, because that mirror, whether somebody else holds it up to you or you to yourself, you come to that come to Jesus moment, if you will, at some point in life.
You know, people always say, "Oh, my life passed before my eyes." You know, I wonder, you know, I wonder if that happens, A, and if you see those moments, the bad, the good, the, you know.
Well, from what I understand, the brain has a way of doing that. It's like it replays, like just neurologically, all of these images start flashing before your eyes, and you do see these images. You do get flashes. There are studies that have talked about that experience that people have had, where in a life-threatening situation, just all these flashes of memory, good, bad, and indifferent, do present themselves. And so if it happens to someone, you know, usually in a car crash or some sort of life-threatening situation perhaps, it might give a person pause to think, I need to reevaluate this and change a couple of things.
Maybe I could change something and fix that, before it's too late. That is a horrible feeling when it's too late.
Right.
You know, we've all run into those situations too, not necessarily with our life, but you know, oh, it's too late to fix that.
Right.
I could have said something and I didn't.
Right.
I can't take that. I can't take the words back that I said.
Yes.
You know, all those things that, you know, you regret. But all right, we might talk a little bit about regret and forgiveness and those things coming up.
Yes.
Okay, great. Okay, so we've talked about integrity and despair, and what is the path to change that outcome, and we're going to be talking a little bit more. Stay with us.
Louisiana needs a hero.
Someone to look after it, preserve it.
We have to do something now.
If everybody took care of their spot, we wouldn't have this conversation.
We all have to do our part.
The power is yours. All you have to do is pick it up.
Care about it. Protect it. Save it.
Be an everyday hero.
Keep Louisiana beautiful.
We're back talking about changing things now to make a big difference later. Good idea to think about that, but how do you do it? So let's talk about that.
Well, you know, oftentimes we get overwhelmed and bombarded with just the day-to-day, you know, the grind that we've been talking about. People kind of just wake up, go about their day, go to bed, wake up, go about their day, go to bed. But you have to make a space to reflect upon the things that are working in your life and the things that are not working. If there are things that are not working, what are those things? And if they're not working, find a way to make them work, change, you know. But be appreciative of the things that are going well. You know, I think creating that space for gratitude is important. We don't show gratitude for the blessings, for the good things, and to the extent that we can do that and focus our attention on the good things in our lives, that sets the stage for integrity later on in life. I think of, you know, a situation like a bowl of soup. You know, you have the noodles, you have the chicken, you have the potatoes, the carrots, the celery, the broth, and then you have a hair in there. You're like, I don't want to eat this soup. It's got a hair in the soup. But if you prepared it, it's probably your hair. And so just take the hair out, you know, just take the hair out and eat that bowl of soup. It's still a delicious bowl of soup with all of these good things and be grateful for all of those things. But we human beings, we have a tendency to fixate on the negative. We tend to focus on that hair. And so to encourage the individual to be grateful for all the good things, because for every bad thing that you might have, and it's true, we all have negative things in our lives that we wish were a little different, but we can name things that are for which to be grateful. And so to engage in that practice of gratitude, that if there's something that we think we would like to be different, okay, fine, we can address that and talk about that, but then really redirect our attention for which we must be grateful.
That is such a character builder. You know, when you think about that, because it teaches you to change your focus to appreciation.
It is.
Whether it's somebody else doing something or something that God has given you, and God, gave you that something else to look at. So I'm not putting God in a separate category, but the things that we are given, that we just pass by, and just take.
Simply having woken up another day.
Yes.
Thank you for another day.
Yeah, I mean, it's rejuvenating, and it really makes you focus less on yourself.
Right, because it's another opportunity. This gift of today is another opportunity to do something for others. And what might that be? What might that look like? How could I do that today?
And it also, when you're busy doing something good for somebody else, you don't have time to focus on your despair.
Right.
You are helping somebody else.
Because you're being generative, to use that word again. You're giving back to others. You're not staying stagnant in something that, if you do it in perpetuity, may lead to despair. If you're being generative and you're giving each day in some capacity, then you're moving toward a life of integrity.
I think of sometimes people who may not have friends, and I think, why don't, if you could get it in yourself or somehow figure out, somebody else might not either. So if I'm their friend, if I reach out, it's hard to reach out sometimes, and maybe you need help in doing that, but to take that step can change your world.
It's transformative when you're reaching out to someone in whatever capacity, someone who perhaps might be lonely, and you're extending that time, you're giving the gift of time and of self to someone else. That is transformative for that individual and for yourself. You get to learn something about someone else and show an interest in someone, and what a gift that is.
Right, and you are when you do those things, you are developing a friendment. Like it or not.
Yeah, slowly you do. In time, it becomes a friendship and a meaningful relationship, perhaps.
Right. So, I know that we were also talking earlier that forgiveness of others, to forgive others, to ask for forgiveness. All those things can help build the life that you want to look back on.
One of the things that I often see in practice, and many of us in mental health see, is this resentment and this rancor that people have with one another because they don't let go of things, either for themselves or for others. Maybe they hold on to something that they didn't feel this perpetual guilt, or someone has wronged them in some sort of way and they don't forgive, and then there's this resentment. And holding on to those things are of no good to anyone. And so it's important to be able to, one, forgive others. Forgive yourself. There's a caveat with that. We were talking during the break, that caveat that in forgiving oneself, true contrition and being remorseful for anything that perhaps we could have done differently, something that may have impacted someone negatively, to ask for forgiveness, make amends when appropriate and necessary or requisite to do so. And then once done and genuine and sincere, be able to forgive yourself to be able to move forward, because otherwise we hold on to things and we stay stuck.
But for me, I can't forgive myself unless I've asked for forgiveness from God and perhaps from others.
And that's an important thing, to be able to ask for forgiveness and to know that you've been forgiven by God, and to ask for forgiveness from others if that is necessary to do so, then to do so, and then to be able to forgive yourself.
Because then you can accept forgiveness. I think when you've been forgiven, you can accept that. It's not necessarily me forgiving myself. It's me accepting the forgiveness.
And then you feel this burden.
It's a freeing.
Just taken off.
Yep.
Very freeing, and then you can move forward in whatever amount of time you have left. Whether you're 80, 90, 100 plus, and
learn from whatever it was, but not feel that anvil.
Because to have that sitting on you, to have that sitting on you at any stage of life, but what I've seen in my work at the end stage of life, where you feel like there's really little to nothing that I can do about it at this point, it's a very big burden, and not a burden that I would like to see anyone be able to have to contend with at that point in their life. It's a difficult thing to watch.
Right, and for many people, spirituality is a great, it is a freeing presence.
It really is. I have noticed in my work that those who do have a spirituality component to their life and they approach it from that end do fare better than those that do not. It just is something that the literature shows it, and I've seen it anecdotally. Individuals who do have a relationship with God, with their higher power, it really is something that is of benefit. There's that component that just makes that possibility of being able to forgive and be forgiven more effective.
Right. For one thing, it takes you out of the center of the universe.
Right.
You know,
Because you're not.
That's true. That's true. So we can really change the future. We can change our future.
We can. We can. And by changing our future in slight ways, we have that ripple effect, that butterfly effect that does impact and change others' future.
Great thing. That's a great blessing in itself, right?
Yes.
Okay. Tips before we go.
Yes. So if we want to live a life of integrity, it's important to start early. And in that process, seek meaningful relationships with others. Practice gratitude every day, and when possible, explore new experiences and really engage in spiritual practices that do help bring you to that point of integrity and help perhaps eliminate despair later in life.
And before we go, let's quick, we have a phone number. It often appears at the bottom.
Yes, the Maronites of Holy Cross are offering free telemental health counseling services to the residents of Louisiana. So anyone who is experiencing any type of distress or despair at any point in their life, they can call that number, and then the administrative assistant will go ahead and pass that over to the clinical director, who will then assign a counselor in training to you, and you will get services to help you move from that point of distress and despair to that of wellness and joy.
Great free resource, you
Yes.
know, that the Maronites and the University of Holy Cross are offering. Okay,
Yes.
great. Well, Roy, thank you, Dr. Salgado, sorry. Thank you, Dr. Roy Salgado, for talking things through. And of course, we thank you for watching and being a part of Coping Today.